In this series, we'll learn how to use Blender's 3D and 2D tools to create this awesome Toon shaded scene. We'll be modeling and texturing and even using the grease pencil tool for our 2D character. So let's jump right in.
TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut and to this Blender series where we've been working with the 3D and 2D tools to create a complete scene from start to finish. Last episode we created the basic scene, and this episode we'll be adding all of the foliage like bushes and grasses to our scene. If you haven't watched the previous episode, you can do so here. Otherwise, let's just jump right into it. Okay, so we're basically done with our hardscaping. It's time now to add a little bit of life to this scene with some softscape or foliage. We're going to create some bushes to which we're going to add a particle system leaf system around the edge, and we're also going to use a particle system to create some flowing grass that will react to wind and things like that, and we'll do a little bit more mesh modeling to create a fallen over tree. The first thing I'm going to do is create the grass. To do that, you basically need an object to apply your particle system to. So I'm going to choose my grass layer up here. So I'm going to go over to my modifiers channel, make sure I've got that open. And I'm just going to add modifier and choose particle system. Then that will give you a new drop down under the particle properties menu where you can actually adjust the settings of that. So it's not done in the modifiers tab. We're going to change the emission type to hair. And immediately you're going to see a whole bunch of thin strands of hair coming out the top of your plane like this. We're just going to quickly switch into solid view up the top there so that we don't lag out our computer too much. The emission factors here you can use to control the length of your grass or hair. In this case, maybe like 0.6, actually it's double that, just so it's nice and long to be starting with. And you want to keep this number quite low for now, because the more you put in here, yes, the more strands of grass you will get, but the more it will also make your computer freak out. You can keep this low and then turn it up when it comes to render time, essentially. So we are going to leave pretty much everything off, but we will need rotation factors. For some reason is under advanced, even though it doesn't seem terribly advanced for me. And the other thing we're going to play around with is the render settings here. We will be rendering as a path, that is true. You can choose an object, which we'll be doing for the bushes later on. But what we want to do is make sure that our hair shape has a larger root than it does at the tip. You can see that if I drag this diameter tip upwards, then you'll start to see the thickness on our grass a little bit. Grass doesn't usually behave like this. It usually clumps together. So what we're going to do is, instead of increasing our number of emissions, we're actually going to do twirl down this children menu and just choose simple children. And what this will do is, for every hair particle that's generated, it will generate a number of children around that. It is important to note that your rendered amount of grass, even in rendered view here, will by default be 10 times more than your display amount. Because we're doing it quite cartoony, we can actually turn the render amount down to be the same as the display amount, and this will give us some nice clumps of grass, which we can then increase to, say, maybe I think about 7,000 I use at render time for this to create like a fairly thick field of grass. But again, we're going to leave it at 1,000 for now. So as you can see, we've started to get some grass, but we want some of these clumps to sort of push themselves together a bit. So we're going to turn down, twirl down this clumping option and just turn up the clumping a bit. And you'll see that will start to draw the points of our grass together. This grass itself is going to be pretty basic. If I go into rendered view here, you can see that it's going to take the color of our base grass mesh and apply that. But what if you want your own material applied to that? That is going to be under your render settings. And you can see here we have material grass like this. If we go to our shading menu, you can see that what we can do is, in fact, let's just disconnect it entirely and create a new material for the grass. And this one we will call grass blades. And on this, we're going to add another one of our simple Toon shaders. So we're going to need a principal BSDF going into a shader to RGB, which will connect like so, and a shader to RGB going into a color ramp. No need to mix anything for these ones. We're just literally going to color ramp in like this. Let's change that from linear to constant and add in a few stops. And for this one, we'll use our brighter collection of greens that we've got on our color palette here. So we want that color for the grass, but we don't want that color for the plane, okay? So the best way to do that is actually to select your grass object here and set that back to be quote unquote grass. So whilst you set the base of the plane to be grass, you can't actually choose the grass blade material from here until you add it as an option in the slots. So I'm just going to add on top of our border a grass blades, okay? Let's put that actually above the border, and we'll make sure to go to our modifier settings for our black border on the grass and just increase the material offset on this solidify modifier here to 2, so that it's still selecting from that third slot now instead of the second slot. And then we can go back to our particle settings and we can change this to be grass blades. And that's going to take the color of our grass blades for the particle, but the color of our grass base for the plane. Looks a bit weird at the moment, but then when you turn up to 7,000 pixels, you'll see that it just basically means that if you're looking at it from a different angle, it's going to be darker underneath than it is on the top there. One little annoying thing is that we're getting a little bit of like overlap on the very edges. So what we need to do is weight paint our plane so that we can choose where our objects appear, where our grass appears. So I'm going to select my plane object again, my grass, and I'm going to Control Tab into weight paint mode. Unlike when you tab into edit mode, it leaves all your modifiers in place, okay? Temporarily, I'm going to go to my modifiers here. I'm going to twirl down on my options and I'm going to hide my particle system from the viewport so I can just see the base of my object. And you can see that it is blue and we have a brush that we can draw with. And when I do draw, you get this kind of heat map. You can play with the radius so that you can start painting in where you want your grass to appear. And everywhere that is red will have like 100% grass. And then down through the colors down to blue will give you less. So basically we'll just paint an area for everything that isn't the very edge. And if you miss a few spots, that's fine because grass isn't going to be super duper uniform, is it? So then when we tab back to object mode, you'll see that unfortunately, nothing has bloody happened. We can turn our grass back on and it's still going across the whole mesh. We actually have to go to our particle settings and then right down at the bottom underneath field weights, under vertex groups, we need to change our density to this new group that's been created. And boom, that'll start. You'll see our grass now has sort of creeped away from the edge. So there is a way to save time here and just copy this modifier down onto our base mesh. Now, earlier we linked materials by selecting both and pressing Control L and copy modifiers, but we don't want to copy all of them. We just want to copy one of the modifiers. And to do that, you need to enable an add-on that comes pre-built with Blender. So we're going to go to Edit and Preferences and then go down to the Add-ons tab here. And we're going to search for Copy. And then there'll be Copy Attributes menu. You need to check that so that it is enabled and then just click refresh. Now all we need to do is select our plane and then shift click our grass and press Ctrl C to open up the Copy Attributes menu. Choose Copy Selected Modifiers and we're going to choose Particle System and click OK. Now, one thing that we want to do to this grass is sort of have the wind blowing through it. So to do that, we're going to add a few more things to our scene. We're going to press Shift A and add a force field for wind. Now this wind here is going to help us choose the direction of our grass blowing. So I'm going to press G and Z to bring that up. Before I go too much further though, I am going to remember that I've left my 7,000 particles on and I'm going to turn that down to say like, 500 just for now whilst we're working on it. And if I select my wind object now, the position doesn't matter, but the rotation you'll see will start to affect the direction of our grass. So which direction do you want the wind to be blowing in? I'm essentially going to want just a little bit of rotation in our grass like so. We now need an object that is essentially just going to make this grass wiggle really easily. So we're going to Shift A again and bring in something called a turbulence field. And we'll bring this up as well so we can see a little bit of it. And if I go into solid view so that we don't have to worry about rendering those textures, you can now see that our grass has started to bend and be all wibbled about. And if we just move this object here with turbulence, you'll see that the grass blows in the wind. So this one turbulence modifier is going to control all of the air particles in our scene. So we'll worry about animating that for later on. For now, we'll just sort of leave them in the scene. So we want to copy the same particles system down onto our plane here. So I'm just going to select that. I'm going to choose to add a new particle system modifier. And under the particle settings, we're just going to choose our first, you'll only have one here. This is just where I've been messing around. Choose your particle settings collection here. And we'll just rename this one grass. So it's easier for us to remember later on. That's going to apply the same physics, all the same settings. And if you change one, it will change all of them. I'm just going to do a simple weight paint on our plane down here as well, because I don't want obviously too much grass in our sand area. Okay, so there we go, roughly correct. Let's just briefly turn that up to 7,000 so we can see what our final grass might look like. And we've got some crazy stuff going on here because it doesn't actually copy across your materials. So you can see here we've got the material border. And that's because if we go to our material settings here, we haven't added the grass, okay? So we're gonna add a new slot for that one on here. We're gonna choose grass blades. We'll put it above the border. And then to make the border work on our ground correctly, we're going to go back to our solidify modifier that we made before, and we're going to increase the material offset just so that all of our textures work properly. And now you can see we have grass down here and grass at the top. Now you might be thinking that this is this craziness here is caused by like the wind, but it's actually not. It's caused by the order of the stack of modifiers. So you can see here that we have our particle system and it is going after our displace modifier here. And our displace modifier on this is way stronger than it is on the grass above. So if we actually put this before our displace modifier, you'll see the grass will stand up a bit better. Now I use that displace modifier for this texture, okay? I don't actually want it affecting the direction that the grass grows from. So I'm actually gonna leave it there underneath like so. And we're gonna actually bring down the overall particle amount, I think, to about 5,000 overall, like that. If you wanted to have the same settings and you're happy with all the settings and a different particle amount, maybe you want more grass up here, less grass down here, you can obviously create a duplicate for this downstairs grass. And then that will allow you to control those values individually, reducing the amount of grass down here compared to up there. So to animate our grass later on, we'll just be animating the position of this turbulence object here. And now we're going to take a look at creating our bushes using object particles instead of path particles. I'm actually going to turn off, just for now, these particle systems in my viewport so that it doesn't send my computer crazy. And a good add-on to enable, actually, whilst we're talking about that, if we go to edit and our preferences, is the modifier controller kind of add-on. If you just type in modifier, it'll come up with modifier tools. And if you tick that and refresh, you'll get this little menu up here. And what that allows you to do is, if I say select A to select everything in my scene and just click this viewport viz, it'll turn off quickly all of the modifiers, or on all of the modifiers with a single click in your scene for every selected object. And of course, you're just toggling them, so you can turn them on and off like this. But if you wanted your curves obviously to remain in place, you can just turn those on individually. So now you're looking at everything with no modifiers, but your scene is still built. So let's create our bushes. Press Shift A and I'm going to bring myself in a cube, and I'm just going to bring that up in Z space a little bit so that it's floating above our scene, and we'll go to solid view as well so we don't have to deal with the lights. We're going to add a modifier onto this subdivision surface just before, and we'll crank it up to about a 4, right click, shade smooth, exactly the same as the rocks so far. Similar to the rocks as well, we're going to add ourselves a displacement modifier, but this time we're going to call it a bush. And under our texture settings here, we're going to change to clouds as opposed to Voronoi. It's going to look similar at the beginning, but as we increase the size, you're going to see how different it is. We're going to be using the size and the contrast as we did before, and you get this more lumpy, puffy kind of texture. Same as before, of course, if you tab into edit mode, using maybe face selection, you can start pulling this around, and that's going to affect your general shape of your bush. Now I want this scale to come up just a little bit more so that we get something like that, where it's not too crazy. And we'll just loop cut this maybe twice in each direction. All right, so Control R and then scroll once, and then Control R and scroll once, like that. That's obviously going to affect the shape of our bush, make it a bit more cubey. Let's do it this way as well. So we're working with a cube like this, and I'm just going to pull these into more of a lumpy shape, and turn off proportional editing and just start pulling out these different lumps. Just something like that. Obviously you can start playing around with them. I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and then I'm going to apply my scale. What we want to do now is cover this in leaves using a single leaf object. It's a similar way to create the grass, but we're going to use this object as our particle. So I'm going to Shift A in object mode and add in a new plane, and we'll just bring that up above here. Let's rotate it along the X axis 90 degrees. Holding Control allows you to snap. Let's then scale it down until we get something roughly the size of one leaf. So let's pop it on the top of our bush and say, yeah, we want nice big chunky leaves. That seems about right. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. First, I'm going to apply that scale. I'm going to tab into edit mode, and this one's really easy. Control R, and we're just going to split it twice. Let's then hold Alt, middle mouse, and flick the mouse to the right to go to this front of the graphic view. Press 1 to go into vertex editing mode. And we're just going to scale down our shape until we get something vaguely leaf-like, okay? So just pressing G to move, S to scale. I'm going to split this down the middle 3 times. Right click to release. I'm going to hold Alt to edge select. Then I'm going to loop slide this by pressing G for move. G again will move it along the plane. And we're just going to bring it in like that. We'll do the same thing here. Alt click, GG, move in. Good game. Alt click the middle and then G and Y to move that back to create the crease in our leaf. Then we're going to select all these parts on the top of our leaf here. And we're going to press scale 0. And that's going to bring them all together. Now, unfortunately, all these points are still here. So if I just select one and move it up, you'll see all these other points. We want to merge these together. So I'm going to press A to select everything, M to bring up the merge menu and choose merge by distance. And then this little setting down here is going to say that any vertexes closer than 0.0001 meters are going to be merged into a single vertex. So let's confirm that with enter. And then now you can see that we've only got the one vertex at the point of our leaf. Apply a modifier to this, subdivision surface, our old reliable friend. And let's do 3. It's probably good enough for a plane like this. While we're at it as well, we'll add a solidify modifier just to give a little bit of chunk. And whilst we're at it again, we'll tab back into object mode and choose shade smooth. Leaves usually aren't perfectly flat, however. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to grab these center points here and just bring them back with G and Y to create that way curve. And create the other curve. I'm going to tab into object mode and add a simple deform. We're going to choose that simple deform as bend. You can see it's kind of going a bit crazy there. We want it to bend around the Z axis. Oh, excuse me. We have to apply all of our transforms so that because we did some rotation earlier, if you remember, and we will now want it to bend along the X axis, and that's going to bend our leaf inwards like that. Let's tab into edit mode, press A to select everything. I'm just going to move everything up so that its origin point is at the base of the leaf like that. And then we can obviously pull down the intensity of our shape. Still in edit mode, I'm going to shift D to duplicate the leaf, right click to release it, G and Y to bring it back. And then moving into front orthographic, we're going to rotate and scale until we get a cluster of 3 leaves. Okay. Something like that. Let's duplicate it again. Right click to release, rotate it this way, move it along like that. Make sure you check the back so you don't have any weird clipping. So we'll actually move this one back in space a bit, rotate it along the Z axis, bring it back in closer like that. Let's scale it down. Like so. We now have in one object a cluster of 3 rotated leaves, which is beautiful. I'm just going to move those down for the sake of simplicity, like that, and we're going to pop them next to our bush. It's now time to scatter our leaves across our bush, okay? So we're going to select our bush, we're going to go to add modifier, and we're going to choose particle system. This particle system this time, we're going to again choose hair, and you can see it's going a bit crazy. And the first thing you want to do is put your object on before you mess with any settings, okay? So we're going to twirl down all these settings, and underneath render, we're going to choose object from the dropdown. The object instance that we're going to eyedropper is our leaf. Bam. And now our bush is covered in leaves. They are a bit small, so let's scale them up. And as you can see, we've now got our kind of leafy bush. They're naturally are going to follow the same rotation as your object here. So if I tab into edit mode, press A to select everything and rotate, you'll see that that affects the rotation of your bush. If you want to change that, obviously if I rotate outside of edit mode, as long as I don't apply, none of that's actually going to change. But if you don't like that rotation, what you can do is under your particle settings here, you can go to advanced, check rotation and choose global Y or global Z. So I'm going to choose velocity hair for this because I want it to be affected by the wind still. And I'm going to add a little bit of phase so I can pick the direction that I want. Let's say about there, and a little bit of randomness like so that we start to intersect. And I'll reduce the number to say like 750. It's a bit of a busy bush at the moment. That's looking okay, but it's going a bit crazy for me. So let's decrease the phase just to there. And for this one, we're just going to rotate that down so that it lies a bit more flat against the bush because that's our like key object there. Looks a bit crazy at the moment, but don't worry, when you go into material mode, it looks good. And then if I grab my turbulent objects, you can see that that's actually affected. All right, so once you're happy with that, we're going to select our leaf object and our bush just by shift clicking, and we're going to press Control P and then choose object to parent those objects together. And what that means is I can now select my bush in the menu, move that around, and it moves the source leaf with it. Let's position this bush, bring it down, position it for now, just kind of like over here. Let's go into material preview mode. And let's add a preview to this bush, okay? A material to this bush, sorry. We'll go into shading, and on our bush, we will choose grass. That's going to shade the bush underneath. And for our particle, we will choose the grass texture. And the good thing about this is we don't have to worry about adding textures or materials to the other objects, because we're just going to choose the original source object and it's going to apply all of that to it as well. We've got a bit of a gap here, so let's increase. I was wrong to reduce the amount. Let's increase the amount of things there. Now that's looking pretty good, but we do need to add our border onto our object, onto our leaves at least, probably not the bush itself. So we're going to go down to our material options with our leaf selected, add a second slot and choose the border. Then up in your modifiers, let's collapse all these down. And we'll add, finally, after everything else, a solidify modifier. Because we've got two, we're going to rename this one border. We'll flip the normals, we'll offset the material, boom, and we now have a black border around our leaves. So once you're happy with that, you can just start duplicating your bush around your scene as you did with the rocks. But now that it's all textured, I'm going to start playing around with the angles of this leaf and things like that so that I can get a bush that, you know, I'm happy with. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. What I did in the end was I made both of the textures, the grass texture, including the interior object, and I changed my rotation to normal so it will follow the surface of the bush better. If I choose to want this to blow in the wind, all I need to do is either animate the internal rotation of the leaf, or I can just briefly animate this randomized phase and phase options here to get it blowing in the wind. So I'm just going to duplicate this bush a few times, play with the interior mesh and just create a few bushes around my scene. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with that for now. So I'm just going to press A to go to everything in my scene, go to my modifiers and toggle all of my viewport modifiers. Hope my computer doesn't freak out, and boom, we now have our bushes hiding in our grass. Obviously important to make sure that you're doing this every now and then with your modifier turned on, at least in solid mode, so that you can actually see how things look in your grass. Like for example, this bush needs to come up a bit. In fact, we'll have it like hiding the lip of the cliff a little bit here as well. Otherwise it just gets lost in the grass and you've done all that modeling for basically no reason. So that's looking pretty nice. I'm going to look through my camera. This is obviously just a temporary camera position. Maybe we'll have it actually be a bit more up like this, or maybe down in the water. But I'm pretty happy with that for now. All right, let's add our final thing that we're going to do for this episode, which is going to be our broken down tree. All right, so we're going to start off then with a pretty basic circle. I'm just going to hide temporarily my turbulence and my wind. I can't even bother to look at them anymore floating around. And we're going to press Shift A, mesh, and we're going to bring in a circle. Let's open up this option down here and we'll just choose 12 vertices for our circle. And then let's bring it up so that we can see what we're working with on the base of our tree. I'm actually going to position this now where I want it, roughly around here. Let's scale it down. And we're going to put the base of our tree maybe about there. Seems good to me. Okay, let's tab into edit mode here and press numpad dot so that I can center my view. Then it's just a simple case of I'm going to create the trunk of my tree first. Okay, so I'm going to extrude by pressing E on the Z axis, and we're just going to go up a bit. And let's go to say maybe the height that we want the tree there. Okay, and just quickly, we're going to test because this tree is eventually going to fall over. Not quite long enough. So we actually want to bring those up just a little bit further. Perfect. Okay, brilliant. So inside here, we're then going to press F to create a face on these, or a good way to do it as well is to extrude once more on the Z axis, and then you can go to scale 0, and that's going to bring them to a point. Then again, A, M by distance is going to merge that point at the top into a singular one. And this is the main trunk of our tree. Now it's looking a bit thick at the moment. It's a bit of a chonker, right? So we're going to scale down the top here so that it at least tapers off a little bit. Then we're going to add some variation to our trunk with some loop cuts. So Control R, scale up the loop cuts. Let's just turn that down a little bit, and we go to edge selection mode, and we're just going to alt click a few of these and just start playing around with the scale and position of them a little bit. We're going to right click and shade smooth this before we go too much further and add a subdivision surface. We're also going to add a Voronoi displacement modifier to this one, and we'll call this one tree bark. We'll go to image or movie and swap that to Voronoi. There is a wood texture that you can play around with. I found it to be pretty damn crazy. It kind of, you can choose bands or rings, but it kind of just goes a bit nuts for me. I've not really gotten along with it. So instead, I'm going to once again choose Voronoi, but have a play. You know, maybe like marble or something could work well, but I'm going to stick with Voronoi for now. We're going to increase the scale of it a whole bunch, okay, and the contrast just a little bit, and that's going to give us just like a lumpy bumpy tree texture. Let's tab into edit mode, and we're going to create the base of our tree. Let's go to face selection here. Let's grab a face, and we'll just extrude it, bonk, outwards. Let's scale it down on the Z axis, and I'm then going to bring it down so that it's intersecting with the ground. Let's loop cut that a few times. Then in face select mode, holding Alt, remember on a vertical line, I can start tweaking this to create our variation in our tree roots, tops of the roots, base of the roots, whatever, you know what I'm talking about, like so. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'll move the whole tree down a touch. Let's create our branches, okay? So the way trees work is they grow for a season, they stop growing, and they spread out looking for light. So essentially, you want to just go around the edges of your tree at a certain height, let's just say about here, and you just want to start pulling these faces out. We'll just do a few branches for now. This looks a bit thin to me, so let's pull that out on the x-axis. And we're just going to keep extruding this outwards, maybe scaling it a bit, maybe just move it a bit. And remember that if you're moving in the viewport by just pressing G, it'll move along the direction that you're looking. So we'll just extrude those out, maybe bring the branch upwards. So make sure I'm on global there, like that. And at some point as well, the season would stop and it would start growing again, splitting again. So we'll split that face. Now we don't want the loop cut to go all the way, okay? So what we're actually gonna do is just select with edge select these two faces here, and then when you right click and choose subdivide, it's going to split between those two faces. That allows us to just extrude these. You'll notice if I try to move this, it's still one object. So if I go to edge select mode and select the middle and press V, that's actually going to split that object into two. Now it's very important that I then go back into here, select these edge loops like that, and press F to create a face on both of those. What that does allow me to do now is to separate these out into two branches like that. Select both of them, scale them down on the Z, they're looking a bit chunky, and extrude those outwards like so, okay? So we're just gonna continue basically doing that for every branch until we get something that we are relatively happy with. If I turn on X-ray mode, for example, I can grab all of these faces here and just start tweaking my branches a little bit, maybe rotating them around so they curve in a bit more. But we're gonna basically just continue that around the entire tree. And when we're done, we'll have ourselves a modeled tree. Remembering, of course, that it doesn't just split once, okay? So up here, you might want to split it again by selecting this face and extruding that out, yeah? So let's do a little bit of an extrude and then another extrude and scale that down, and another extrude and maybe move that so it bends outwards like that. And all of a sudden, you're looking at a tree. Now, I'm not going to model all the way around because I'm going to have this tree fallen over, so there's no real point. But what I am going to do is we'll rename this tree, okay? We'll tab into edit mode and turn on X-ray. Then I'll select everything around there, including those extra bits there that I missed, so that we have pretty much all of this top section of tree. Then I'm going to press P for new object via selection. And that's going to move the top half of this tree into its own object that is now called tree 1. Then we'll take our tree trunk, we'll right click and choose set origin to geometry to see where it puts it. It's up there, it's no good for us. Let's turn off X-ray mode, okay? So let's hide our tree trunk and go to our tree stump, tab into edit mode, and we'll edge select this loop here. Then we're going to extrude upwards again just a little bit and scale it down. And that's going to give us like the lip of our bark for later on. Then we will press 1 for vertex mode, extrude again, upwards, scale 0 to zero that all out, Enter to confirm it, G and Z to move that down. Okay. So now we've got something like that. Then A and M merge by distance to merge those points into one. Then we'll alt-click this border here and press Control-B to bevel it. And that's going to just basically split that for us. And then pressing that again, we can then bring that down to create the dip in our wood. We want it to have broken off. So what we're going to do is go to face select mode and select these few face edges here and just bring them up as if it's like snapped off irregularly. Then when we tab back, we can see that we have a tree stump that's kind of got one kind of half broken edge. And you can add as much or as little details to this as you want. You know, maybe I can loop, maybe I can say subdivide this section here and then just start bringing this up, maybe extrude it upwards and scale that down to create more lumps and bumps around the edges. So maybe extrude that one too, scale it down. Let's select this face, subdivide it, extrude that one up, extrude that one up a little bit, just to create a bit where it looks like it's snapped off. Now what we can do is go to top mode, press 7 to go to top mode, and then shift right click the center of this stump. And what that's essentially going to do is put our sort of world 3D cursor in there. When we turn back on our tree stump, we can then right click this and choose set origin to 3D cursor. And that's going to allow us to rotate our trees that it's fallen over. Let's then move it over a bit here. And I'm going to actually just rotate this one along the x-axis as well till it's lying down like that. So you can see now why I didn't put branches on the underside because, well, frankly, there's no point. And then we'll do the same thing on the bottom of this trunk, which obviously at the moment doesn't have a face. So we now have our broken tree all modeled. What we need to do now is apply a texture to it. So let's go to our material preview and let's see what our dirt texture looks like on this. Might look fine. And add our cliff wall or dirt texture. Yeah, that looks pretty okay. We can start with that at least. And now that we've got it textured as well, we can start playing with our displacement and maybe decreasing the size. And maybe we'll just increase brightness ever so slightly just so it displaces it more. That looks good to me. Let's apply the same material to the trunk, okay? But you'll notice that obviously the inside of a tree trunk is a different color, usually, to the outside of a tree trunk. And we'll add our border material on this last because we're actually going to be splitting this mesh to apply different materials to it, but in a different method than we did with our ground. We're going to tab into our tree trunk and we're going to go to face select mode. Let's temporarily turn off the displacement modifier in our viewport and go to solid selection and turn off our subdivision surface in our viewport so we can easily see the faces that we're selecting. And we're going to select all the faces on the inside of this trunk here. This is important, not these faces because that would technically still be bark. Let's turn those back on so we can see what we're working with. Go to material preview. So now we have these faces. We're going to assign a different material just to those faces. So if we go to material settings here, create a new slot and we'll call this one inner bark. With those faces still selected, we just click assign. So now if I go to say my cliff wall texture and I go inside and I'm just going to copy these nodes so that I don't have to do it again, basically. We'll go back to inner bark for that. We'll just delete those there, paste that there, and connect the color to the surface material output. I can essentially just delete these lower colors and slide these ones along. So now we've got a lighter bark texture on the inside of our tree stump and the darker texture on the outside. Looking at this again, our cliff wall texture again, I don't really like that that wood. It needs to like absorb the light a bit better, if that makes sense. So we'll just copy these, go back up, and we'll duplicate our cliff wall, and we'll call this tree bark. Then we can just delete, paste, and connect. Or if you wanted to, you could group these as well into a node group if you thought you were going to mix them later on. And I'm actually going to crank it so that a little bit less light hits our tree. Something like that looks good to me. Awesome. Then I go to this object here. We'll do the same thing. We'll swap this cliff wall. We don't want you. We want tree bark. Yeah, that looks much nicer. We're going to tab into edit mode and we'll select all the bottom faces of our tree. We can add a new material slot. We will call that inner bark, or inner trunk, I should really have called it. And we'll click assign, Bam, that's looking nice. Tab back out of that. Obviously it's darker in there. If we had a bit more light hit it, then we would see that. Finally, let's add another texture for our border. Okay, and we'll add a solidify modifier onto that, which is, I think I put it at 0.02 thickness. Materials are flipped and the offset this time is going to be 2 because of extra material that's added to it. However, we can't see our material on the outside. And I believe that is because if I turn on face orientation, you'll see that some of our objects here are actually flipped. So our leaves have got their normals flipped, which is usually bad, but doesn't really matter in this kind of shading style. What that means is, however, let's just turn that back off so that it's easier to see. Actually, let's leave it on for now. We need to tab into edit mode, press A to select everything and choose mesh normals flip. Okay. And then when we tab back into object mode and we can turn that overlay off, we should now see that we've got our border material around the edges of our trunk. So we'll do that for this guy too. Tab, A, mesh, normals, flip, tab back out. Then when we add the material to it, so we'll add our border, we'll add our solidify modifier, which is 0.02, normals flipped. You'd think that you wouldn't have to do that if you just leave the normals unflipped, but you do, it's weird. Offset by 2, and bam, our tree trunk now has our border on it as well. Let's go back to layout mode, press A to select everything in our scene, go to our modifiers and toggle all of the modifiers on and off to see what our grass looks like. Boom. That's looking pretty nice, if I say so myself. I think that is plenty for today's tutorial. What we've essentially done is all of the softscape. There's a few details we'll be adding next time, like some mushrooms and flowers and things like that to our scene. And then after that, we'll be jumping into all of the grease pencil elements, like creating the water and adding our animated character to the scene. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, make sure to comment and let me know what you'd like to see in future Blender tutorials, how I can improve, all that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you next time. I've had loads of fun making this. Hopefully you've had fun watching it. I'll see you next time on TipTut. Once again, I'd like to extend absolutely massive thank yous to my level 2 and above members, without whom TipTut would have died a long time ago. Become a TipTutan yourself by clicking that join button below for exclusive perks and benefits.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.